Hi, how you doing? You know, it honestly surprises me that I haven't made this video yet, but we're here now. An analysis of Twilight Sparkle. It's been a while since I've made one of these. I hope I still know how. Anyway, Twilight. Arguably the face of Friendship is Magic. Many people's favourite pony and a personal favourite of mine. However, despite that fame, she's not perfect. And that's what I'll be looking at in this video. The balance of good and bad in Twilight. Not morally, I mean good writing aspects and bad writing aspects, but just saying good and bad sounds cooler, let's be honest. So let's dive into it and see what makes Twilight, well, Twilight. To start off this critique of Twilight, we have to start from the beginning. In the early seasons, Twilight Sparkle was us. She was neurotic, overprepared, and a little socially awkward, and pretty much a mess, and that was what originally hooked a lot of people onto her. While her flaws could be exaggerated for comedy or drama sometimes, they were still grounded in real human feelings and didn't stray too far from it. The way she panicked over her deadline and obsessed over her checklists in Lesson 0, spiraling into a full-blown anxiety attack and making rash decisions, it all felt so real. Obviously, up until the love spell she put on the plush. Twilight wasn't a typical, distant, magical prodigy. She was a nerd with good intentions who tried a little too hard. She had power, sure, but she didn't know quite what to do with it yet, and neither did the show. So in the early seasons, she's treated often as an everyday unicorn despite doing stuff like this. And this. That mix of capability and insecurity made her the perfect blank canvas for the audience to experience Equestria through. In, I'd say, seasons 1 to 3, we learned most things at the same time as her. The magic of friendship, the quirks of Ponyville, the weirdness of each of her new friends, it all unfolded at her pace, and by extension, ours. Twilight's confusion, her growth, even her little freakouts were our way into this world. She was analytical, skeptical, yet still open-minded and naive, that perfect balance of student and stand-in for the viewer. Her problems were mostly small scale, but they still mattered. Episodes like Look Before You Sleep, The Ticketmaster, Lesson 0, and more, none of them, well, again, maybe Lesson 0 if Celestia hadn't stepped in, were pretty contained in personal problems, which all helped developing Twi, her friends, and their dynamic. There was also a rhythm to her role that gave the show its cozy structure, the Lesson of the Week format. Every episode she'd learn something about friendship and write a letter to Celestia about it. It was formulaic, sure, but it's a kid's show, so some of that is expected, right? And anyway, it still worked because it made Twilight's growth more visible. Watching her slowly loosen up, go from reclusive bookworm to genuine friend, was satisfying in a way that's hard to describe. It kind of felt like watching someone grow into themselves, I guess, and that is actually a pretty good way of putting it, since chances are, Twilight was originally written as the character she was maybe halfway through season 1, and in the premiere, she's obviously quite different. So in a way, she is actually growing into herself, or the main idea of her character. Later, however, somewhere along the line, that version of Twilight starts to fade. When you compare, let's just say, season 2 Twilight to, like, season 6, they're basically two different characters. The old Twilight worried about writing a friendship report on time, the new one worries about managing Equestria. The scale has changed, and with it, so did the tone. Early Twilight's relatability came from her limitations, the fact that she didn't always have the answers. Once she started becoming the pony who always knew the right course of action and never really struggled with anything, she lost that spark of vulnerability. It's not that she became an outright unlikable character. No, not at all. I say she just became less of a real character. The OG Twilight made sense because she reflected us. She was anxious, curious, flawed, and learning. She wasn't a ruler or a moral authority, she was a pony trying to figure things out, one friendship report at a time. That grounded human core was what made her truly magical. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself there though, because when Twilight actually became an alicorn, I'd be lying if it wasn't a good or triumphant moment. It was like watching a student graduate, the culmination of everything she'd learned about friendship, leadership, and growth so far. For 3 seasons, she worked through her anxiety, solved friendship crises, and studied under Celestia. Her ascension wasn't a sudden twist, it was honestly the natural next step. In that moment, it felt like she'd reached the end of her personal journey, finally confident enough to spread her wings, literally and figuratively. But after that, things got a bit confusing. Mainly due to the writers and people who worked on the show not actually knowing if they would continue or not, since it was uncertain whether the show would get renewed. So for sure, if the show had ended with Twi becoming an alicorn, it would be perfect. But it did get renewed, and suddenly Twilight was royalty. But what was she actually meant to do? Teach? Be Celestia's successor? Lead Ponyville? The show initially never gave a clear answer, and throughout the rest of the seasons would try pretty much all of those things. She wasn't quite the relatable student anymore, but she also wasn't fully written with the confidence or wisdom that her new title implied. She was powerful, but narratively powerless. trapped in this awkward middle ground where the show wanted her to be both the same Twilight we loved and the next leader of Equestria. And that tension was never fully resolved, and it's part of why later seasons feel so off when it comes to her character. I definitely don't hate Princess Twilight. I feel like when I make negative points like this, I often sound like I really hate what I'm talking about, and in some cases, like with the school, that is more of the case, but Twi most definitely isn't. I love Princess Twilight, and she definitely still hits post-coronation. In this critique, I'm just trying to look closer and trying to point out what it is that changes with her character throughout, because by say around season 6 onward, I would be lying if I said I still had that same love for her character. But that change had to start somewhere, and I believe that start was with her alicornation. The old friendship lessons that once felt personal and grounded for her suddenly ballooned into near political issues. Twilight was handling disputes between kingdoms and solving international crises, and organising large-scale operations that often had no actual tie to friendship, even if they had the word in their name sometimes. The stakes got bigger, but the intimacy disappeared. Instead of growing with Twilight, we started watching her from a distance. Although she was still objectively the most followed and quote-unquote main character, she felt disconnected. After all of this, is she still our Twilight? The one who freaked out over being tardy, or the one who'd write letters about her progress? Or is she now this distant, idealized version of herself? The one who gives advice instead of needing it? In a way, her transformation mirrors the show's own. It grew bigger, grander, and more polished, but maybe lost some of the personal charm that made it special. Maybe not straight away in season 4, but at some point after becoming a princess, Twilight lost a lot of the stuff that made her feel real. The quirks and the awkwardness, the little social stumbles that made her so endearing in the first place. They just kinda faded away. Early Twilight was full of personality. She'd ramble when nervous, make awkward faces when trying to act confident, and explode into hilarious meltdowns when the world didn't line up with her plans. But by the later seasons, those traits were more like occasional callbacks and consistent parts of who she was. Her panic moments stopped feeling like natural reactions and started feeling like obligations. Writers remembering that Twilight exists and forgetting that she's this perfect princess now, and resetting her back to square one so they can meet their Twilight episode quota. If you're gonna make her character much more complete and blank, don't try to force imperfections, it's too late for that now. She's already become much more composed and wise by that point. What used to be genuine anxiety, that lovable overthinking energy, has been flattened into a predictable trope. Twilight's no longer the pony fumbling her way through lessons on friendship and identity, she's the one explaining those lessons to every pony else. An example of this for me is in the season 7 episode A Royal Problem. Upon learning Starlight got called to a friendship problem at Canterlot, Twilight gets extremely nervous and even uses a spell to check up on Starlight and try and sort of do her job for her. In concept, that's not bad, it is in line with Twilight's basic character traits, but it feels so forced and over the top. Does Twilight behave like this normally in season 7? No. She does this because they need her to, and it doesn't work at this point in the show. Her character has moved way past that. Realistically, I think Twilight would have some reservations, obviously, and probably be worried about Starlight, but not to this extent. By, again, season 7 or 8, she's still technically Twilight Sparkle, but she's lost the awkward charm that made her feel like someone we could actually relate to. Her character becomes polished. The flaws that once grounded her are now sanded down into quirks that only show up when convenient for comic relief. It's wild when you compare season 1 Twilight to, say, season 6 Twilight. Early on, she's unsure of herself, curious and constantly discovering new things about the world. She's equal to the audience in what she knows. She's the pony asking questions and not answering them. That made her perspective fresh and inviting. We saw Equestria through her eyes, so every new friendship, lesson and disaster felt personal. But later, Twilight already knows the answers before the episode even begins. She's too experienced, too self-assured, too finished. The fun of watching her figuring things out, or seeing her stumble and adapt, just isn't really there anymore. Twilight used to make sense because she didn't have it all figured out. She was powerful, but human. Well, pony, but you know what I mean. Once she became the all-knowing mentor archetype, that vulnerability disappeared. You can't really relate to a princess who already has the answers. Having said that, although I don't think it's fair to act like this problem is due to purely how Twilight is written, because there's another factor that made this the only way they could write her. The show's power creep problem. I touched on it in a video from a while back, but I think it's relevant mentioning it here again. For those who aren't familiar with the term power creep, it's traditionally a game term referring to developers buffing every other character instead of nerfing one, if that one is OP. So instead of bringing them down, it brings everyone up to that level. And that's kind of what happened to Friendship is Magic. As the show went on, the main six just kept on facing greater and greater threats, and had to become more and more powerful to deal with it, each premiere trying to outdo the last one, so to speak. Each time, some new power is unlocked, and eventually it's all blown out of proportion. Twilight being the one most powerful on paper suffers the most from this. She was always gonna be the strong one, but by the time the last season rolls around, she is textbook overpowered, and due to that, loses her relatability for the same reasons I've already mentioned before. I believe, it's my personal theory, that she wouldn't have become so distant had the show's power creep not been so severe. She could still become a princess and have power, but not on the same scale. Save some room for relatability somewhere and keep aspects of her character. Or if they had to keep the ridiculous level of power creep, they could make it sort of referenced in the show. Not a full fourth wall break or anything, but write it into the story. Write into the story how the characters have trouble controlling the power they possess. Off the top of my head, there's only really one moment like that in the show, where Twilight absorbs the other princess's magic to hide it from Tirek. And that's good. It's great, but I feel like we need more of that kind of thing to show that these characters, especially Twilight, are still the ones we got to know in season 1 despite having crazy amounts of powerful magic around them. It's hard not to wonder if Twilight really needed to become Celestia 2.0. Like, was that truly the natural end to her story, or just the only one that made sense on paper? On one hand, it's poetic, the student becoming the teacher, the cycle continues, and Equestria moves forward, but on the other, it feels almost hollow. Twilight spent years learning to be comfortable with imperfection, with the idea that friendship and growth are messy, unpredictable things, so when she finally ascends into this pristine, perfect ruler, doesn't that kind of undercut what made her journey so meaningful? It's like the show rewarded her for being good at friendship, when the point was never to master it, but to live it. That's just one way to look at it though, because although Twilight does seemingly become a Celestia type figure, we can see even just from the epilogue scenes, Twilight rules with the ideology of friendship, always keeping that as her #1 priority as ruler of Equestria. Twilight probably took the good aspects she learnt from Celestia and added her own ideology onto it, cutting out some of the dated tradition and distance that Celestia had and choosing to be a more equal and relatable ruler. But to be honest, both of those interpretations are kinda up in the air, as apart from the epilogue scenes in the last episode, we don't get that much of a sense of how Twilight rules. At least in the actual show. Comics, I don't know about. Twilight's ending is supposed to be happy. She's leading, she's respected, she's achieved everything she wanted, and she's teaching a whole new generation of ponies about it. There's also something bittersweet to it. The pony who once wrote friendship reports, who used to struggle with connection, has moved on. This is less of a problem with Twilight that I'm talking about here and more of just an aspect of her character arc and the intended emotions the audience is supposed to feel. From the point where she becomes an alicorn, I think everyone knew one day Twilight was going to move on from being the student that we follow and end up being the leader. It's the natural next step for her character, but it still feels sad for the audience. It's like we lose the Twilight we used to know, to this wise and more distant version. I guess this does link to the rest of the video with that kind of theme, but I just want to emphasize I'm focusing on Twilight's whole arc here, not zooming in on one problem with it in retrospective. It's the bittersweet ending of seeing all the characters we know and love achieving their goals and dreams, but knowing that we won't see them again. We of course feel pride and are happy for Twilight in her role as ruler of Equestria, but also miss the Twilight who used to worry about being late on her homework because that pony, the flawed, curious one, was gone forever. In conclusion, I'd have to say that Twilight is a great character. You don't become as famous and recognizable as her with no reason. However, her character still has flaws in terms of how she was written, becoming more distant and less Twilight-y early on. I understand that was where her character would lead eventually, but I just think it happened too soon, and separated her from the audience too much, turning her into more of an actual blank slate exposition plot mover than the theoretical blank slate, where she had personality quirks and many unique things about her, but was still naive and learnt new things at the same pace as us. An audience stand-in with character. But even despite her narrative shortcomings, I still love Twilight, and so do many other people. And without her, Friendship's Magic would be infinitely worse off. So at the end of the day, Twilight is Twilight. She may have some flaws, but she's still the pony we fell in love with. And that's it for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed. It's been a bit since the last proper character analysis video, so I felt it was about time we got another one on the channel. Twilight was the most glaring choice for pony that I hadn't done yet. She's interesting and captivating, but also has those narrative flaws and shortcomings that make her a fascinating character to critique. I hope you did enjoy the video and got some sort of value from it. If you didn't, well, that's just unfortunate, but if you did, then please do leave it a like down below and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so why not help out? If you want to support the channel even more, you could become a channel member. Thanks to the Red Ravioli, Creative Zone and MyFumi for being monotonal members. And with that, till next week, thanks for watching, I've been Monodash, and I'll see you sometime soon.
I would love a daffodil and daisy sandwich.